And so like I had no choice. I didn't want to get made fun of anymore. I didn't want to be overweight. And so the same type of theory applies where you can't just look at singular problems and have singular answers. And so a lot of people don't understand, like, imaging does not equal intervention. And so, I mean, the biggest thing is anytime you eat out, 99% of places are going to be using vegetable oils when they're cooked with stuff. For instance, one of the things that I think that people don't do enough now is just connect face-to-face without interruptions for 3
Ryan Muncie is probably the smartest guy I know.
Trust me, Muncie is the nutrition guy.
Ryan Muncie's out there trying to make the world better for all of us.
The Optimal Performance Podcast is bold, edgy, creative, entertaining, and epic.
Ryan Muncie is my go-to guy.
Ryan Muncie he's the first guy I call.
He's making people's lives better. Ryan Muncie's an innovator.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Optimal Performance Podcast. The OPP is brought to you by Natural Stacks, makers of 100% natural and open source supplements designed to help you live optimal. For more information on how to build optimal mental and physical performance into your life, keep it right here, listening to the OPP, and of course go to naturalstacks.com. All right, guys, really cool episode for you today. This is Dr. Anthony Gustin. Anthony is a sports chiropractor. He is the founder and president of a few different food companies. One of them is Equip Foods, formerly known as Pure Wad, and also Perfect Keto. So sit back. This is going to be a really fun episode today. We're talking about a lot of things that will help all of us as optimizers, whether it's mental performance, keeping things on track, and time management, and juggling projects, but also the keto side of things, the physical wellness side of things, where we incorporate movement practices and physical recovery and healing and well-being into all of this stuff. So this is really fun. A couple of housekeeping notes. As always, guys, go to naturalstacks.com. You'll be able to see the show notes on the blog post for this episode. Leave us a 5-star review. We love those. They help us out a lot. Go to iTunes and do that. Share the OPP with the people in your life that you know will benefit from and enjoy the things that we're talking about. And finally, I've got an announcement for you guys. This is one of the final episodes of the OPP that I will host. Starting in January 2018, I will be hosting my own show. It will be called The Better Human Project, and you'll be able to find it on iTunes under The Better Human Project, or just by searching my name, Ryan Muncie. We'll tell you more about that over there. For now, we'll just say thank you to Natural Stacks for the opportunity to host the OPP. This has been a blast. I have enjoyed every minute of it. I have enjoyed being with you, the listeners, and on the new show, I will continue to do everything that I have been doing here in terms of seeking and disseminating all of the best knowledge to help you be the best possible human that you can be. Plus, the catch over there will be that we are taking 50% of all the proceeds and going to charity with that. So it's be better and do better. All right, here's your show. Enjoy Dr. Anthony Gustin on the OPP. Anthony, thanks for hanging out with us today.
Thanks for having me, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Doing well. You?
Great.
Good. All right. Well, before we jump into this, we're going to read your Twitter bio like we do for all of our guests.
Twitter bio? I don't know if I've updated that in about 3 years, man. We'll see how it goes, though. We'll see how out of date it is.
All right. So I'll read it, and then you get a chance to add anything you want to add. It says, sports chiro, functional medicine practitioner, strength/CrossFit coach, and food and fitness skeptic turned entrepreneur, founder of Perfect Ketones and Equip Foods.
I buy it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's start with sports chiro. What's the difference between a chiro and a sports chiro?
So I'm probably gonna get a lot of hate mail from this. I usually do whenever this type of stuff airs. I'm generally not a huge fan of chiropractors, for the sense that majority of the chiropractic profession is founded on very old science, where people think that they're putting joints in another place and that cures all ailments. And so the train of thought is that your spine is made up of certain segments, and out of your spine runs spinal nerves. So your spinal cord goes down the middle of your spinal column, and the spinal nerve comes out of your vertebral segments in between them. And that if you have your spine misaligned, that causes pressure on your nerve roots, and then that causes disease anywhere. So all your tissues, all your muscles, all your joints, everything is innervated by your nervous system, which comes down through the spinal cord and through the nerve roots. So if you have any pressure on that, the hypothesis says that if you correct that pressure, then you reduce the interference, and that leads to health wherever you need it. And so the thought for that chiro was founded on, that a lot of chiros still kind of go by, is that you don't need to do anything in the body besides adjust spinal segments, and that cures everything. Not a big fan of that. And so sports chiro is very different, where we operate kind of as a hybrid between like a PT and orthopedist, obviously not doing surgery, but we're looking at function of the whole body and how everything works together, not just obviously spinal segments. Like the spine is a part of your body which moves. We're going to look at that, but looking at things from like a pretty comprehensive system, from function of your body and how your joints are operating, and basically how you're moving, and looking at it from kind of a whole system approach. And so instead of just saying like, oh, I have elbow pain. Okay, well, I'm not just going to look at your elbow. I need to see how your wrist is moving, how your hands moving, the movements you're doing, how your shoulders are operating, how your spine's moving, and how basically you create from like your trunk and your hips motion that translates to your shoulder, then your elbow, then your hand, because all of those things could influence elbow problems. And so looking at things from an integrated approach, from a movement specific standpoint, is kind of the difference between a sports chiro and one who's just a general chiropractor who does spinal adjustments. And so not to say that spinal adjustments aren't helpful for a lot of different reasons, just that they're not going to fix elbow problems, in my opinion. Right. So that's kind of the difference between those two things. And again, bring on the hate mail. I'll receive it all day long. It's fine. It's no problem.
No, I don't envision you getting a lot of hate mail for that. I think that was a great response. And I think it'll be one that comes back up, as we continue our conversation, because, you do take that really high level view of the body and how it works, and movement and nutrition. And that'll come back up as we talk about ketosis and ketones again, I'm sure. But before we do all that, you and I have talked before. We're both sort of skeptics. We like to understand, we like to question why and understand systems. At what point did you sort of have that skeptical moment where you looked at traditional chiropractic and you said, well, there's more to it than just adjusting the spine?
Well, I think that happened early on, and not just with chiropractic, but with health in general. I was super overweight and super unhealthy when I was younger. And I was getting injured a bunch and just generally unhealthy, and was doing all the things that I was told to be healthy, and none of them worked. And so I had to figure this out by myself. And so that became why I was testing things from an early age. Like when I was 13, 14, I was trying out different meal plans and stuff like this. And like there was dial-up internet then. There wasn't like a lot of blogs and all that stuff that you could research, whatever. I was just reading textbooks when I was that young about science and trying to figure out what worked for me and why. And so like I had no choice. I didn't want to get made fun of anymore. I didn't want to be overweight. And so that's what drove me initially. And so I had a bunch of knee injuries playing football when I was younger. And so I went to a local chiro PT clinic, and they said, well, there's nothing wrong with your knees. The orthopedist said you need to have surgery, and on an MRI, I showed like meniscus tears, but they said your hips are just weak and you're not having any external rotation in your hips. So you're getting all this torsional force in your knees. And I was like, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. And so this is kind of what led me from sports chiro to functional medicine as well, is that that's an integrated approach of more so what's going on inside of your body instead of just outside or external with kind of joints and muscles and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And so the same type of theory applies, where you can't just look at singular problems and have singular answers. And so you need to have with the body an integrated approach. And so I've been tinkering with that stuff and trying to see things, like you said, from a higher level view more often. And so like if you had a fire alarm going off in your house, it's not going to be annoying. Obviously, you're not going to go cover up the fire alarm. Like you're going to ask, okay, where's the fire and how did it get started and how do we not have that fire again? And so just that in all of health, whether that be movement, sleep, stress, nutrition, figuring out kind of the downstream effect of the things you're doing and how things influence each other has been kind of the whole integrated approach that I've been trying to solve and just get better at as I move forward here.
Yeah, there's a lot in that answer. And, I guess the first thing that stands out to me is, how fortunate you were to have that positive experience with, somebody who looked at your hips and saw your movement from that integrative and functional standpoint, instead of just saying, oh, well, yeah, that dude's right. Let's give you, let's take you in for knee surgery.
which is ridiculous. You know what I mean? 16 years old, but to get knee surgery where you don't grow new meniscus, like they're going to cut that out when I'm 16. Are you kidding me?
Right.
Like, still on imaging, this is what a lot of people don't understand. Like, imaging does not equal intervention. And so I still have that shredded meniscus in my left knee if you were to image it, but I feel great. And the thing is too, like, I was traveling a lot last few months, wasn't keeping up with a bunch of kind of hip stability things, and maybe ate a little more inflammatory diet than I usually would. Knee started acting up again, started becoming really sore. But when I have those things in check and actually operating at high level, it's never a problem. And so a lot of people get imaging or they get lab results and say, oh, my blood value is at this amount, or I have a herniated disc, therefore I can't do this. And they let the imaging dictate their life. And I think that that's kind of an incorrect way to look at things as well. Like, you need to strip it back even further and ask yourselves, like, does this actually equal an intervention? Or is this just an associated finding in which you can work around?
Yeah. So let's take a step back into that answer. And you said, you've been traveling the last few months, and maybe you haven't been as on point and maybe eating some more of the inflammatory foods than you normally would. What are some of the foods that people may be eating that are going to increase inflammation, where maybe they didn't think that it would?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing is anytime you eat out, 99% of places are going to be using vegetable oils when they're cooked with stuff. And so I try to be rigorous when I do this, but sometimes when I travel and eat local food, it's just not even worth it to modify. And so I just know that I'm going to be taking a hit with that. So inflammatory vegetable oils, and like, even if you get a side of vegetables and you eat super clean, you're not eating the garbage. Most things are going to be cooked, or sauces will have hidden ingredients that you don't expect. And so that's where I think a lot of the garbage comes from. And I think also food quality. Yeah, you can get vegetables and stuff, but I try to go lean meat when possible when I'm eating out, unless it clearly states where the meat comes from. So I'm sure people listening to this know that a lot of the good and bad things in meat come in the fat tissue. So let's say you have a commercially raised animal product, you're gonna have a lot of the inflammation in the bad fat, right? You're also gonna have a lot of the micronutrients and good fat when it's grass fed. And so I think that's where a make or break comes when you actually know your food quality. And so I try to strip it away and just get a lean protein source that's just amino acids when I do travel. But yeah, I think that what the biggest thing is just being mindful of what the food's cooked in, and kind of what could be hidden in different sauces and things like that.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I don't think anybody has actually brought that up on the podcast previously. Are you still practicing? Or actively?
Very, very few. So I have a few different people that I work with, kind of on a one-on-one basis. But with the way that so kind of what happened there was, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I started this company called Equip Foods. Was Pure Water originally, and so the sports med and functional medicine practice was great. It was very rewarding, and I was learning a lot. But I get to a point where I had this realization with myself that I was only going to be impacting maximum like 15 to 20 people a day. And if I were to do that throughout the rest of my life, I literally wrote down on a sheet of paper, okay, this times 40 years, equals this many people I can impact. I'm like, well, this is not the problem I want to solve. Like, this needs to grow greater than it should be.
Yep.
So I stripped it down and looked at, okay, what are fundamental problems with people impeding them from maximal health? And when it came down to it, the answer was always nutrition. And so whether that's recovering from a sports injury, say like you strain a muscle, all of your tissues are made from the things you eat. Okay. So if you want to build new things or repair tissue, you need to have good raw materials. It's just that simple. And then you're looking at, okay, someone has gut problems, or someone has diabetes, or somebody has inflammatory disease, stuff like this. From a functional medicine standpoint, food quality. So food kind of was this fundamental pillar that if you didn't have that, good luck with reaching optimal health at any other point in your life.
Right.
So with that, I thought, okay, what are scalable ways to solve a nutrition problem? Like, what are the things that people are not doing that they could be doing an easier job of? And so I started writing articles at this point, kind of got a little bit of an online following at that stage, and asked people, like, what are the biggest problems? And for people that knew they should be eating better, but weren't going out and buying all this, grass-fed meat at Whole Foods or wherever, and good local farmers market type of produce, it was convenience. And so what we ended up launching was a line of supplements. I also, growing up, I think you were the same way, probably, which is like any male, like late 20s, early 30s at this point, has run through the gamut of disgusting supplements, trying to like eke out every strength gain. And it's like, I went through that world. I know how disgusting that is. I'm like, okay, people are already making a bad choice here with super inflammatory and filler laden, like whey proteins and stuff like this that are just bad for your gut and just have a bunch of garbage in them. So I made a line of filler free supplements that, we did a beef protein, a sweet potato powder, greens powder, like things that represent whole foods as much as possible to make them more convenient for people, not as a way to replace eating whole foods, but as a way to kind of open the conversation when people start taking these things and say, oh man, I feel way better when I eat this way. Mm-hmm. And so we can educate them on the back end and say, well, yeah, this is what happens when you eat whole food. And here's how you can incorporate more of that stuff in your daily life. Another thing that I was doing a lot in my practice was using a ketogenic diet, either with athletes or with people from the functional medicine standpoint of fixing and reversing a lot of different disease states. And so the biggest problem with that was accessibility and maintenance of a ketogenic diet. So getting someone on board from kind of a standard American diet to a ketogenic diet is very therapeutic, but very challenging. There's a lot of behavior change that needs to happen. And so from that, okay, we look at nutrition as the main problem. How can we fix it? We can fix it with the ketogenic diet, but what is the main problem? It's accessibility and adherence. And so we've created now a line of products and we're going more into food products. So started out with exogenous ketones, for example, where somebody can take those and kind of sample what being in a high state of ketosis would be like, as well as other products that are complementary and make ketosis much easier. So we're going more into food products now so that people can just, anything they would need to replace with that maybe has sugars in it or things that they like with a ketogenic diet so they can reduce the burden of processing sugars in their bodies as much as possible. We're trying to fix that problem now as well. And so, running those two companies as well as many other projects, there's just no way looking at the scale. I mean, we've shipped, tens of thousands of orders a month, which equals tens of thousands of people that can be affected and use these products. And I can do this all the time. Like if I wanted to practice in the weekend, we have to line up schedules and I have to go one-on-one to a patient. And it's just not an effective use in a scalable solution, in my opinion. And so I've stripped down middle of last year, left my day-to-day practice, but had still been working with people one-on-one. And now I'm kind of trimming down that and hopefully getting away from that just to focus on everything 100%.
Yeah, it's interesting. You and I have not had that conversation previously, and it's another area where we would either agree or have had similar experiences, because that's one of the reasons that I wanted to get out of the gym. Originally I was in a Gold's gym and I had the mental issue. I felt confined. It was, hey, I can only reach people who are members of this location in this city. If they're not a member of this gym, I can't help them. And I didn't like that. So that was one of the reasons I started my own place. And then, at that point, after a couple of years of that, I had the same realization that you just had where, I can be here all day, every day, and I'm only going to impact at most 200 members at a time. And, through the internet, we have the ability to reach millions of people and hopefully impact the lives of, thousands, if not millions of people over the course of our lives. So I can relate to that. I totally understand that. So we'll focus and talk more about what you're doing with Perfect Keto. But before we do that, just a question in sort of the higher level view, since we've already mentioned that with your serial entrepreneurship, I think people are starting to get an understanding of how many things you have your hands in at one time. Talk a little bit about the importance of systems and communication for making sure that all those businesses and projects stay on track.
If some of my team members were able to describe my level of systems that I have and how intense I am about stuff, most people would just laugh. I have a very rigid system so in the beginning of the year, I go through this very huge audit of every part of my life and come up with these ways I want to improve in the direction I want to go. That boils down into this really insane spreadsheet that I keep daily with things that I want to do either on a daily basis or projects I want to get done that day. based upon a point system, I get ranked, and I rank myself kind of on a sliding scale, and I get like either red, yellow, or green rating for the week, which then will tell me how to go. I also track in there books I've read, conversations I've had, movement routines I'm doing, all this different stuff. And that's just for like my day to day. I also have a really ridiculous Evernote system so Evernote is an application you can use to manage just notes in general. And so anytime something pops in my head, that goes into Evernote. And then later on, I sort that into, I have basically 7 different projects or businesses that I'm running right now. And so then it goes to a pending folder, and then those get sorted into things I'm waiting on, things that need to be actionable, and then I rank those on a priority basis. And so when I want to do something in a day, I say, okay, I'm going to work on perfect keto. I go into the Evernote that is actionable, and it's ranked top to bottom of things I need to do.
Yep.
With that, we have communication for the team on Slack. So I have 7 different Slack channels that I manage. Try to not do any email at all. But essentially it's the daily spreadsheet plus Evernote plus Slack is kind of how all this is done. And then every time that we get something that is kind of the way where I perfect it, or I think that this is the best way to do it, we make a Google Doc, and that should be there that anybody should be able to follow. And so screenshots, video tutorials if necessary, and just layering that over and over and over again. It should be like, in my opinion, and this is what's good and bad, it's kind of the identity shift. Going from clinician to business owner, you have to let go of a lot of ego and a lot of the I'm irreplaceable type of feeling. Mm-hmm. As a clinician, you are pretty irreplaceable, in my opinion. Like a lot of stuff is basically an algorithm in your head that you're taking someone through, and there's a lot of touch points and there's a lot of depth to your visit. When you're a business owner, you should essentially be putting yourself out of work over and over and over and over again, which is a very humbling experience. When sometimes I look back, I'm like, oh, well, this company could probably be running without me. And I'm like, this is a good thing, but it's also, it's a little bit of an ego check at the same time.
Right.
But those type of systems, plus always just making yourself replaceable, I think is the best way to move forward in business and not stagnate and wonder, why the hell you're not getting results.
Yeah, that's really, really valuable information. What's on the audit, that annual self-audit that you do? What are a few things that you're looking at to sort of make sure that you are growing and evolving year after year?
Yeah, so it changes every year, but there's a big kind of purpose, vision, goals type of setting that I do. And the purpose doesn't really change. And for me, that's to positively affect as many people's health as like basically through nutrition as possible. And then kind of break down, I mean, I can pull up my sheet right now and look at it if you want, but we have, so for 2017, there were a bunch of physical goals, a bunch of mental goals, so personal, some financial and spiritual, whereas I did, 100 unique, meaningful personal connections. So for instance, one of the things that I think that people don't do enough now is just connect face-to-face without interruptions for 3-4 hours at a time. Like no one does this. Do you think the last time you talked to somebody for 3 hours without technology?
Yeah. I can, because I just did it this weekend.
Okay. Well,
but it stands out. I mean, it was, it's not something that happens without intention, and it doesn't happen as often as, I would like for it to.
Right. And so with a variety of people, especially living in San Francisco, good luck. Yeah. I mean, you're limited to 15-minute iPhone interrupted coffee meetings. It's awful. And so that's something that is on there. So, and then after that, I break down every business into kind of big goals that I want to get accomplished that year. And so let me see here.
This is all, I mean, it's great. I mean, I don't think we need every single line, but, just given the time of year that this show is coming out, and, it's that time where people start to reflect on, well, how did I do in 2017? What do I want for myself and for my businesses? And I think it's great that, you sort of, I'm very much the same way. I do it the same, I have business, I have personal life or relationship. Then I have my fitness goals, my nutrition goals. You break that down very much the same way I do into, I guess you could call them compartments or domains of your life.
Yeah. I think the biggest part is that every month I also review every single goal and my progress towards it, and whether I'm going in the right direction or not. And so this continual audit as well is imperative, because otherwise you don't know what direction you're going in. You don't know what actions you need to take. And another big thing is I expect to only be successful with about 70% of my goals I make in a year. I think anything more than that, and you place the bar too low. And so anything lower than that, then you shot way too high. And so I think that around the 65 to 75% range of success in the goals is where you want to be. I think that sets you enough to motivate you to push forward and push hard without setting the goals too wild that you're not accomplishing anything.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing too, is like, we're a couple weeks out and I can see already, like it'll be probably about 75% of the things I accomplish. Otherwise I'm failing a lot, and being comfortable with that and acknowledging like, oh, all this stuff didn't happen because all this other stuff happened, or focus shifted, or, plans changed.
So some of the things that maybe you didn't succeed at, or the ones that you failed on, will they roll over into the next year, or will you reevaluate and say, maybe that's not, the best use of our time, or that's no longer a priority?
Yeah, I think that constantly reevaluating that. And so even throughout the year, I've stopped certain goals and changed them or modified them significantly. And so, like you said, some lose significance. I think some will carry over, and like one or two will miss by like 3 weeks because we want to launch a certain product line that I wanted to do this year. So I'm going to put it on next year. But otherwise, I'm going to see, okay, this goal wasn't met. Why wasn't it met? Is it still a priority? Was there a fatal system in place that like wasn't allowing this to happen? What were the reasons that kind of impeded it? Was it important in the first place? And just kind of reevaluate those things from the ground up. And so I usually go on a big retreat at the end of the year. So this year I'm going to Europe, and it'll be a good 3, 4, 5 days where I just think, and then I'll write all that stuff down, and then I'll plan out the year from that, kind of working backwards. And I think a lot of people also don't take the mental space to do these things. Like if you're working day to day and then you go home at night to try to do this over lunch, like good luck having any kind of clarity.
Right.
Yeah. You need to step back, get some room, actually room in it, and have some deep thinking without trying to consume so much information or create so much output. I think both of these things really clog up your brain. And so I think it's just a couple of days where you're not on your phone, you're not trying to read a bunch of stuff, you're not trying to listen to podcasts, you're not trying to do work, you're not trying to do emails, and just think. And it's like, okay, what is important to me? Why is it important to me? Like, what is possible? Like, what are all the things I could do? And work on that for a few days. Sounds very counterproductive because you're not getting stuff done. But when this guides you for an entire year and you can track it, I think this is a very good use of time.
Yeah, I like it. Anthony, let's talk a little bit about Perfect Keto. There are a lot of ketone companies. Keto has basically exploded in the last 2 years. How is Perfect Keto different from some of the other companies in the industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. So especially when we launched, there were 2 other companies that were, for the same product, about 2 times more expensive. And they, in my opinion, tasted awful. So the product wasn't, the adherence for ketosis wasn't there.
And when you say same product, you're talking about specifically an exogenous ketone.
Yeah, we launched with an exogenous ketone last November. And so one company was at like $250 a tub, which is insane. The other one was about $90, $95. And with running the other company, and they both tasted terrible in my opinion. And they also did not disclose how much and what ingredients they used in their product, which to me is a bizarre thing. Coming from Equip, I always wanted transparency to be the biggest thing that we focused on. Mm-hmm. And so we launched, in my opinion, better flavor. No fillers is a big thing. So I don't trust most companies myself. And like, if I don't know the owners of a company at this point, I don't use the products.
Yeah.
There's just so much garbage. Like one of the first products that we launched with Equip was the pre-workout. And the manufacturer we're using, I mean, I didn't know what the hell I was doing at this point. I was just learning. I still am. But we got the package and it said, 454 grams, what it should be. But it actually weighed like 510. I was like, what the hell is this? And I go, oh, well, there's X, Y, and Z that we put in to help the machines run faster and to do this and that. And they go, it's industry standard. You don't have to put it on the label. Don't worry. Everybody does it. Like, what do you mean? Like, no, everybody does it. Don't worry about it. Yeah. It's like, okay, this is not what I signed up for. So it was a huge legal problem. And at that point, like both companies have been self-funded too. So like at that point, it was like tens of thousands of dollars. And I was like, I thought we were going to go under this point. It was awful. But learned from that very early on that like, most companies do this, and it's disgusting.
Yep. They're in the industry, those are called flow agents, and it's something that Natural Stacks has dealt with. And I mean, there's transparency, open source, no fillers. That's a huge part of Natural Stacks as well. So our listeners are looking for that from companies. Yeah,
you guys are on a very short list of companies that I actually trust. So thank you for doing the right thing on that. But yeah, I mean, that was something that just the dedication to none of that garbage in our products has been huge too. Not having each of proprietary blends, and just focused on what actually matters. And so what I always tell my team is that we're not a product-based company. Like, we just have that as a way to give people what they want to succeed in a ketogenic diet. But what we are is an educational company. So what we've been doing has been using the revenue from all the products to create content and educational materials that people need to actually make behavior changes to make the ketogenic diet successful for them. It's a very nuanced and very challenging thing to actually execute on properly. And so we've invested hard into content. We publish about 5 articles a week for the past year. And so we are an education company first, in my opinion, and product company second. So we're not just trying to sell stuff because it's hot and to make tons of money. We're trying to reinvest as much as possible into the space so it can grow and people can be as successful as possible. That's another huge difference.
Yeah, I really love that. So 2 questions on that. First, probably the shorter answer. Where can listeners get more of that educational material?
Yeah, so I write some on my own site, which is just dranthonygustin.com. And then the other one is just perfectketo.com.
Okay. So we'll have links to both of those in the show notes for you guys listening. And then that's the second time that you've mentioned the big behavior changes required to move to a ketogenic lifestyle. What are some of those major hurdles, and what makes them maybe more challenging than a different dietary shift?
I mean, look at the food availability right now. When somebody goes out to eat, when they go to a grocery store, when they go to a convenience store, when they're at the airport, when people are actually purchasing food anywhere. I mean, I live in San Francisco and it's still hard here. I mean, this is like one of the places that most food is grown, Central Valley of California, super healthy spot, super affluent, and still it's difficult to eat healthy here. I mean, we're not even talking about a ketogenic diet. Like, just to eat real food can be challenging. And so I think it's also the confusion between, one study says that strawberries will kill you. One study says that they're the best food ever. You know what I mean? All this conflict, when these studies are done and then extrapolated in such a poor form and not ever thought of it on an individual level. And so different things work for different people at different times. And so the biggest thing, in my opinion, is just the individuality of health and getting clarity on one's goals so that they can actually test what works for them in an individual setting. And so educating people about that, I think, is one of the biggest things that they can do. So that way they can own their own health and not just say like, oh, in the ketogenic diet, like, you should just eat 50 grams of carbs and you'll be good. It doesn't work like that. I mean, you and I talked before that you can eat 150 grams of protein and be in ketosis, and I can eat 70 and be ketosis. It's a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, really big range. And it's not like our body weight is that different.
Yeah, again, you're way more jacked than me. So
I'm telling you, I'm not.
But yeah, I mean, so this is where people need to realize that. Okay,
but I mean, and just to put that in perspective, I mean, my wife follows a ketogenic diet, and I mean, she's at around, I think she's around 90 to 100 grams of protein a day, and oftentimes she'll check her blood ketones, and she's like 2 or 3. I mean, she's way up there, and I mean, she's eating, sounds like maybe more protein than you, or just as much.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the biggest thing, is that people want to make a ketogenic diet, since it's a quantity-based diet. And so what that means is people want to have these simple rules and following it. Oh, how many macros should I eat? Well, it depends. Like, have you tested this? Like, are you actually looking at what works for you? Are you actually eating real food? And so this is another thing too, where people can get maybe an initial positive response switching from a standard American diet to a low carb or ketogenic diet. But if the food quality sucks, in a couple of weeks, couple of months, you're going to fall apart. Because again, like I said earlier, your body is made up of the things you eat. So if you're eating trash, expect to feel and look like trash. It's just as simple as it is. And so people, make an initial change, but the huge roadblock that they face is that they don't have quality food first. And so this is a problem where people, I don't know if you see much of like on social media, these keto experts that eat,
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Velveeta with bacon chopped up in it. And it's because they register ketones in the blood meter. They think they're healthy. It's absurd.
Yeah.
And so these are the type of people where it's like, they tell people, oh yeah, just eat 33 grams of carbs a day and you'll be good, and just eat like this. I think this is one of the big things that I think is dangerous about a ketogenic diet, is that it's not a quality-based diet inherently. You can eat like shit and you can eat whatever kind of food quality and still register high amount of ketones in your blood. So I think that's dangerous. And I think getting people to think about food from a more integrated approach of what they're eating and the quality of food. So as I said, like a ketogenic diet can be super therapeutic and very good for a lot of people. But I think until you get to the point where you're zooming out and looking at food quality, I don't even like to mess with the ketogenic diet. There's too much there. I mean, this is a generic statement for people. Like I understand, I've said this before, and people get a little pushback and a little upset, saying like, "Oh, well, my kid has seizures and he needs to have ketones at a certain level." It's like, yes, fine, okay, but like for a general population, you need to be eating real food. And even in that instance, the kid who has seizures should be eating a real food ketogenic diet,
right?
Like a quality ketogenic diet,
right?
So that's a huge thing for me.
Yeah, I was going to ask you this later in the conversation, but I think now is as good a time as any to work it in. But you recently wrote a blog post, and it was kind of challenging people, saying the ketogenic diet is not inherently healthy. I think this was a big part of that article. What were some of the other points that you made in that article that resonated with people?
Well, I mean, I think the food quality one was huge, and I think also relying on the cookie cutter advice is another one. So I think it makes people mentally lazy, and I don't think it allows people to really own their own health. And I think that you and I have done a really good job trying to teach people that like life should be an ongoing experiment, and it doesn't ever end.
Right.
You're always going to be collecting data, and that should just be a mental habit that people form. And I think that when they look for generic advice, and I think I wrote in the article something like, if you look for average advice, expect to operate like an average human, which, I mean, look around when you're at an airport. Like, I don't think you want that.
Right. No, I love that. That was a great line. So with all that said, you don't follow a ketogenic diet year round, right?
Yeah, dude.
You do?
Not year round. I'd say like 70% of the time.
Okay. So how do you decide like when you're going to cycle in and out of that? Or is it just sort of like, hey, I'm going to be traveling. It's going to be hard to stick to it. I'm going to bounce out. What does that look like for you?
Yeah. So I think generally just low carb. Like I said, I was overweight when I was younger. So I think I just tolerate carbs not as great as other people. And so that's something I learned over a long period of time. Always whole food, start there. And then, like you said, if I'm traveling or if I'm somewhere where the local food is very carbohydrate rich and from real sources, I'll eat that. Also too, like if I'm training for bumping up my training intensity and I feel better with a little bit more carbs. I know you've talked about carb cycling in the past and how you feel better. I'm the same way. So add in a sweet potato a couple times a week, or add in some berries or something like that, and I feel way better. And I just think it's normal.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's normal to switch back and forth and not have to be so rigid. I used to track very intensely every single thing I ate at every time of the day, and amounts and blood ketone levels and all that different stuff. And I think that you at that point lose some intuition about what you actually should be eating.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if I'm feeling a little sluggish on my energy levels, I'll either do a short fast or I'll start eating more carbohydrates. Another thing that I realized, like if my sleep quality suffers a little bit, my intensity in the gym isn't there. If I'm just feeling like I don't have sustained energy throughout the day, definitely ramp that up and I feel 100 times better. And then I peel back because I love the mental focus that a ketogenic diet provides me. But in general, I skew more towards, I'd say, a very low carb ketogenic diet, 70 to 80% of the time.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier when you were more in your practice on a day-to-day basis, you were helping some athletes with the ketogenic diet. As I know, again, we've kind of hit this a few times already, but everything is individual. But from a stereotypical standpoint for an athlete, what recommendations would you make for athletes trying to be ketogenic?
Right. So Bay Area has a lot of high-end triathletes. So for them, it's amazing actually. And so they have to fuel up less throughout their races. They can take like little exogenous ketone packs with them and mix them up like Gatorade while they're running. Using fat as a fuel for extended races like that, or anything, I would say like anything over an hour, I would say ketosis is really good for. Anything under an hour or explosive, don't do it. And this is the thing where people try to apply it this broad stroke basis to sports performance, and I think that's really incorrect thing to do. So like, for instance, I have a bunch of NFL players that I used to work on. Some of them, they knew what I was doing and knew what I was writing about and wanted to do a ketogenic diet. And I said, absolutely not. So the average play in the NFL lasts 7 seconds.
Yeah.
If you know anything about energy systems, you know that that's not a good thing to like try to metabolize fat and break it down to energy to use it for a 7-second burst over and over and over again. So, I mean, it's just same thing, high-end, like games level CrossFit athletes. Don't eat a ketogenic diet. There's always going to be some freak that actually does perform well on it. And you're like, well, look at this guy. They did it. Look at this gal. Yep. Okay. Like totally fine. But like, just because
that's when you got to hit them with the never use the exception to prove the rule.
Exactly. Like there's always going to be a freak at the end of the bell curve. You know what I mean? And chances are usually very low that you're that freak.
If you're that freak, you already know you're that person.
You know.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be asking at that point.
Right. No, I like it. That's really good advice. Understand what you're trying to do, what the fuel pathway or what system is involved. And if you understand how that works, then you can understand, how to plug in the inputs that you need to get the output that you want.
Exactly.
So
and test too. So like you don't know how you are on that spectrum unless you try it out. Don't do it in a competitive landscape. So do it in training. Do it when you're ramping up.
At least for the first time, right?
Yeah, and I mean, Dom D'Agostino is one of the leading researchers, and friend Ryan Lowry is a young cat down in Florida too. He's doing a lot of stuff, and they both found that like roughly you can be anywhere from like 3 to 4 months is how long it could take for someone to become fully keto adapted and fat adapted. And so, don't give up on this after a week or two if you don't feel great. If you have that much of an off season to kind of ramp it up and trial it out, go ahead. But it may take longer than you think of just getting past this initial quote unquote keto flu where your body's transitioning from using carbohydrates as the main fuel source to using ketones. And so after that, your body has certain mechanisms where it takes ketones into a cell, certain transporters. And so those are upregulated over the course of up to 4 months. So research is still out on like how long specifically, and I'm sure it varies very much individually, but you have to look at that and say, okay, well, it's 1 or 2 weeks in, I still don't feel like I'm 100%. It might take longer than that. And so that's one of the things now we're starting to realize is that it may take some time before you're fully fat adapted.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And one of the things that I've noticed and actually had conversations with quite a few people I've worked with and some other friends, that once you hit that point of becoming fat adapted, it's something that as long as you eat well, you don't really lose that ability. And in fact, you actually build better metabolic flexibility and that being the ability to go back and forth between fuel sources. And, you could have that higher carb day and then it doesn't take you 3 more months to get fat adapted again. It might take you 3 or 4 more days and then you can get back into ketosis.
Exactly. So good example of this. I was pretty strict keto for a few weeks. The other night, I was back in San Francisco and went to this ridiculous sushi spot called Robin. One of my favorite spots in the city. It pounded maybe like 25 pieces of sushi. His tasting menu was incredible. Definitely was not in ketosis after that. But the next day, fasted most of the day, levels started to climb at night. And then the day after that, already back in ketosis. And so this is one of these things where you don't have to go through this major transition period over and over and over again. And I felt fine that day after too. It wasn't like I was going through this huge adaptation process again.
Right.
Like your cellular, like you said, you have a little bit of metabolic flexibility where once you upregulate a lot of these transporters in your cells, it's not like if you eat carbs one day, they're all going to go away. This is the fear that people have, is that, well, ketogenic diet sucks because if I eat carbs once, I'm going to have to feel like crap again for the next week. It's like, no, it doesn't work that way. Like your body's very plastic in the sense that, you're going to have certain receptors and transporters be upregulated or downregulated over time and exposure to these things. And just because you eat carbohydrates once a week or once a month or whatever, doesn't mean that you're going to lose your ability to use fat as a fuel.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, if we look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, I just fail to believe that humans ever were rigid and structured in eating a certain way. I mean, we are opportunistic feeders. Throughout our history, we've eaten whatever we could get our hands on. Sometimes that meant we didn't eat for a day because we couldn't. It's only been in the last 100 years that we've had access to as much food and whatever food as we want, and most of it being, an inferior quality food with all the factory farmed and, Franken foods that are on grocery store shelves now. But our bodies are designed to eat half of a woolly mammoth one day and then not eat for 2 or 3 days. And then, maybe we walk past a fig tree and we, eat until we're, in a carb coma. If it's real food and, I think our bodies are designed to be able to handle it. And
yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of thinking about this as well. And so if you think about how the ketogenic diet was used in history, it was probably more so during fasting than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
If you actually look at the things people were eating, yeah, definitely lower carb than what humans are eating now. But fasting was probably the primary source of elevated ketone levels in the blood. I mean, maybe for guys like you who are savage warriors, you can eat a half a woolly mammoth and still have like 0.7 registering on your ketone meter. But yeah, I mean, look at the composition of the foods. Like, yeah, it's probably going to be moderate, but when ketone levels were the highest was probably during fasting. I mean, how much were people crushing 2 avocados and 3 cups of coconut oil a day?
Right.
It probably wasn't a very realistic thing.
And even if they were doing that much coconut oil in a day, you got to think about how much work was involved to get that much coconut oil. Like it wasn't like they were grabbing it off the shelf out of the pantry. They were cracking coconuts.
Like an expeller press where they were like pushing coconut meat through
right
stuff. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. Like, and this is where people are like, do you have to eat keto for the rest of your life? I get all these crazy questions from people.
Yeah.
Because of the position I'm in, which is fine. I know people are curious. It's great, but no, you don't. Like, this is a permanent thing.
Yeah. I got another question that I want to hear your answer to. I know you get this one all the time, and I've actually seen your answer for it on a blog, but I definitely want to get it on our podcast. So I'll hit you with it. Does using exogenous ketones kick one out of an intermittent fast?
I would say no, because it's a bioidentical form of beta-hydroxybutyrate molecule, which you're endogenously producing. And so you have to ask yourself, like, what is the purpose of the fast? And I would say if it's just to get what would you say? So you do a lot of intermittent fasting. What is your goal from intermittent fasting?
It's really just to compress eating windows.
Yeah. For what reason? To keep insulin low?
Yeah, to keep insulin low, to get a little bit of autophagy. I mean, if I get, basically I'm on a 18-6 or a 24, cycle. So if I know if I get to like the 18 or 20 hour mark that, basically it's 18 is about when, blood sugar levels are kind of stabilizing and insulin is, all that stuff is kind of the magic happens and you start to get into that autophagy at around 18, 20 hours. So, I mean, if I can do that on a daily basis, I realize I'm not getting the full benefit of like a 3 or 5 day fast, but if I can get close to that every single day, and plus, I mean, I just know that I'm not eating all the time every day. So, I'm giving my body a break, from having to digest food and, secrete insulin and do all that stuff.
Yeah. So when you have something like a beta-hydroxybutyrate, we don't put any other stuff in the product, obviously. And so I know other people combine it with MCT, this other stuff. And so you don't have to metabolize it in the same way. So like I said, it's already a compound that's floating around in your bloodstream. And so you can just assimilate it. And so if it's a short-term fast, like an intermittent fast, I would say no, it does not break the fast from a technical standpoint of that's what your body's already using for an energy source. And it's not going to spike your insulin. You're going to actually increase your ketone levels. I mean, look at your blood glucose and test your levels if you're concerned about this. The thing where I think the science is out yet, but is the autophagy at like a 2 to 3 day window.
Right.
Maybe it would interfere with that. I don't know. No one knows because we haven't looked at that yet. However, they have done other studies where it shows that increased beta-hydroxybutyrate from exogenous sources, like a supplement, mimics a lot of pathways that are found in fasting. So a lot of the anti-inflammatory pathways, a lot of this type of stuff actually gets increased even if you eat food due to the beta hydroxybutyrate acting on certain cellular processes. And so it mimics fasting in that way. So I don't know if it would actually enhance autophagy or blunt it. We don't know at this point. And that's just something to think of as far as it may or may not interfere positively or negatively in that phase. But I think if you're just looking at a 16, 18 hour window, I would say you're not going to lose any of the benefits that you're getting from that window.
Yeah. And I think for most people who are asking that question, that's sort of how they're thinking about it or looking at it. Like, hey, if I wake up in the morning and I do this, if I take an exogenous ketone first thing in the morning, or, if my eating window is closed for the day and I feel like drinking, exogenous ketones in the evening, is that going to interrupt my fast?
Try it out, see how you feel.
Yeah.
That's your levels. That's my suggestion.
Right. Well, so that's really interesting that, it may or may not impact the fasting mimicking diets. How would we test that? Is there a way?
Yeah, certain markers and measure autophagy with administration of exogenous ketones and that.
Yeah.
If anyone out there wants to tackle that one.
Yeah, that'd be a really cool study.
Ryan, Larry, please, if you're listening, please do that.
We'll send it to him and be like, hey, here's a study. Can you run with this? So we talked a little bit about food choices and sort of how you've been eating. We've talked previously, but you're going to give the carnivore diet a run in a few weeks. Let's talk about some of your concerns, some of the things you want to test. What are you hoping to either experience or not see? What modifications or precautions will you take as you set up your version of carnivore diet?
Yeah, so you and I chatted when you first started doing this, how, I was asking where you're getting your animals from. Are you doing organ meats? I'll probably go, when I do stuff like this, I know you mentioned that you kind of did it at limited, so you were testing or not really like measuring every single thing you were eating. I might make sure I get a certain amount of organ meats, at least on a week-to-week basis, saying like, okay, I'm going to buy a liver or two, and I'm going to eat those this week, and not necessarily be like, oh, it needs to be 17 grams of liver a day, but more so like this week I'm going to have this shopping list, and this is what I'm going to eat, and then vary that. So maybe it's one type of wild fish or another. I'm going to say like, okay, roughly this much, and like you kind of corrected for a ribeye, I'm going to do that as well and try to keep it as consistent as possible, but get as much wild game as possible, and then also get as much organ meat as possible. You made up a good point earlier in another chat we had about getting marrow and tons of bone broth, and so that's another thing too. What I worry about is just micronutrients in general and the micronutrient spread. Will that be levied by all the organ meat? I don't know. I guess we'll see. We'll see how we feel, and we'll see how it goes. And this is something that I haven't really dug into as deeply as other people have. And so I know the micronutrient density of organ meats is off the charts and way better than any type of vegetable or fruit that we could have. And so there's that, but is the diversity there? I guess we'll see.
Yeah. One of the other things, we didn't mention this in the previous conversations, but I've heard Sean Baker talk about this. I've heard some of the other pro carnivore people on Twitter talking about this, but the RDI, recommended daily intake, for a lot of these micronutrients is based on the standard American diet. So we know, for example, that vitamin C and glucose compete for uptake. So if you eat a diet that doesn't contain as much glucose as the standard American diet, we may not need as much vitamin C in order to get what we need into the places we need it. Another example of that would be manganese, which is used in carbohydrate metabolism. Well, if you're not eating glucose or carbohydrates, you may have a diminished requirement for manganese. So a lot of these RDIs, recommended daily intakes, may be not as accurate as we think if we're not eating the standard American diet. The other thing is, when have they ever been correct? Everything that's ever been recommended has basically been wrong. So what makes us so confident in this recommendation that they're correct on micronutrients?
Right. I may just go through a survey of things like mitochondrial function, and like, okay, we need this at this phase in electron transport chain. Are we getting enough of that? And just from an energy metabolic standpoint, not necessarily based on the RDI,
right.
Like garbage.
Right. That's a thought that I've had over the last month and a half as I've been going through this. But
yeah, and you see this in blood values as well. Like for instance, vitamin D is a good one.
Yep.
Or magnesium. A lot of these things where if you're over 24 nanograms per deciliter of vitamin D, you're technically are fine on a standard blood test, but your body actually doesn't function properly until you're at 45, maybe 65, depends on a person. And so same thing with reference ranges in blood work.
Yep.
That's just based on the average sick American, which again, do you want to be that person? I don't want to be that person.
Yeah. No, I don't either. Yeah. No, but, and you made a really good point. And that was one of the reasons that I focused on marrow, organ meats, and bone broth is that, we know the micronutrient profile in organ meats is off the charts. And if you can get it from a variety of different types of wild game that are eating the biggest variety of herbs and grasses and plant sources, then you're going to bioaccumulate, a wide range of those. So I'm curious, you mentioned wild game is going to be a part of your protocol. Where are you going to acquire your wild game?
It depends if so I'm either going to be in San Francisco or Austin at the time I do this. And so just whatever local farms or local people that I know in the area who either hunt or have access to this stuff is going to be where I pick it up. And so there's a spot up north in Marin that I go to called Bud's Custom Meats. So legit sounding name, huh? Bud's.
Yeah. Does he sell online?
No, I don't believe so. So you mentioned also you do the U.S. Wellness liver roast, and so places like that do exist. And so if I need to ship some stuff in, I'll do that. Okay. So yeah, it totally depends on where I'm going to be at the time.
Excellent.
Obviously, eating more local stuff is ideal to me. So maybe I'll go to wild boar in Texas or something like that, versus here, I'll go a little bit different, go more fish. Another few things that I'm interested in tracking now, like you said, that you had levels of ketones in your blood. I'll be interested to see if I adapt to a higher protein level, if I actually start producing ketones and I adapt to that. Like I said, I can't go over 70, 80 grams right now. But I wonder if I switch primarily to this carnivore diet, if I will actually change my cellular metabolism to allow more of a ketogenic state. That'll be interesting. Strength and kind of body comp will be interesting to me as well. Mm-hmm. I've been doing a little bit more gymnastics programming in the last couple of months just because I've been traveling a ton. I knew that's something I could do while be on the road. Yeah. But I definitely noticed, and I don't know if it's from eating more of a ketogenic diet or if it's from training a little bit differently, but strength is certainly down. And with that, body comp has gone, I wouldn't say worse, but I'm definitely a little bit smaller than I have been in the past few years. And so I'm wondering if I add a little bit more strength training plus this, like you said, strength just went through the roof with you. And so maybe that's something I start adding back in a little bit more.
Yeah. And I mean, it's Sean Baker, the biggest, most high profile proponent of the carnivore diet. I mean, when he was on Joe Rogan, he said, if you want to grow more muscle tissue, well, one of the easiest ways to do that is to eat more animal tissue. Like you said, I mean, we're made of what we eat. I mean, if you eat more meat, it's going to facilitate your ability to, lay down more muscle tissue.
The same thing. This is why people don't realize how important collagen is.
Yeah.
In connective tissue. Like if you want better connective tissue, you have to eat connective tissue. Like that's just the way it is.
Yeah. So
protein is made of building blocks.
Yeah.
Amino acids. If you need those Legos, if you want to build a Lego house that looks the same.
You guys have a collagen product, right? The Perfect Keto?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's collagen plus MCT powder. So we've found that using the MCT powder with collagen. So we noticed that a lot of people were just having regular collagen and getting some spikes in blood sugar because it metabolizes so quickly. Mm-hmm. And so pairing it 2-to-1 ratio of collagen to MCT powder actually blunted that and increased ketones a little bit. And it just tastes ridiculous.
That's really smart. My wife's mentor, when I met my wife, she was doing an endocrinology fellowship at the VA in Salem, Virginia. And
love at first sight, I bet.
Yeah. Her mentor is he's a brilliant endocrinologist, and she has been a part of his research, and we just met him or ran into him again at the Obesity Society meetings in Washington, D.C. That was actually the very first week that I was starting the carnivore diet. And when we were talking with him, he was actually there. They were presenting posters at the conference, research posters, and he had done boluses of all three macronutrients, protein, carb, and fat, given them to fasting individuals to see how it impacted their blood sugar. And, just like you said, interestingly, protein, and I think people who've been paying attention to research know this, that protein is insulinogenic. It does create that blood sugar, like protein by itself will create a blood sugar spike and an insulin release, which is one of the reasons why I tell people not to have only protein before you work out, because you're going to get a blood sugar crash during your workout. Right. So I think it's really smart that you guys did that. You added a little bit of fat to it to prevent that.
So another thing that is kind of associated with that, like you're saying, protein just before. So there's a lot of, obviously, if the rationale of having protein after workout is that you're breaking down certain muscle tissue, and that if you want to build it back up, you want the same building blocks, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of research coming out now that is showing collagen before or during exercise actually increases collagen synthesis and connective tissue repair after exercise and in between. And so it's kind of an interesting, like I've noticed multiple papers like this that are coming out recently. A guy named Mike Nelson, I'm sure you know him. Yeah. He's been peppering me with those because he knows that I'm a big fan of collagen. And that is something that is what I've been, especially with gymnastic stuff, is like it's connective tissue training is essentially what it is. Like isometrics and connective tissue training. And so I've started to do that where, like, right when I start working out, I'll have the collagen MCT mix. And then afterwards I'll have, standard, whatever type of real food protein. I actually feel pretty good doing that. I feel like I recover way quicker in between, and I'm getting less like overuse tendencies. Whereas before, without that, like when I travel and don't have a collagen and stuff with me, like I'll sort of notice like my wrists and my elbows because of how much load of like handstand work and planche work and stuff like that. I get pretty sore, but with that stuff like before and during, especially not afterwards, that I feel way better. So it's kind of an interesting note on timing in collagen specifically. Yeah,
that's really cool. That's really cool. And I think just to circle back to his papers, he was telling me, and I will track him down and I'll try to get this and maybe put it on the show notes here for you guys. But his name is Dr. Aronimish, and it's spelled IRANAM. I'm not even going to try. Ali Aronimish is his name. So I'll Google it and I'll put it on the show notes for you guys. I'm sorry, Dr. Aronimish, if you happen to hear this somehow. But carbs were 3 to 20 times more insulinogenic than protein or fat, or they had that level of burden on the pancreas, was his wording, compared to protein or fat. Obviously the 20 was for fat because it has a lower burden. But I mean,
what type of carbohydrate?
I don't remember what, I think it was just a glucose bolus, like the typical one that they give you if you go in and you do like a fasting blood sugar test.
It'd be interesting to see that with like a polysaccharide or.
Yeah, it would be. And this was actually like the second or third version of some of their studies. The original study that they were doing is they recruited me for it. And that was actually the very first conversation I had with Donna. She recruited me. It was a testosterone and growth hormone study. And they were looking at males' levels of these hormones fasted. And then they would come back for a second day and they would give you this carbohydrate bolus to see how the carbs impacted testosterone and growth hormone release. So,
and how did that work for you specifically? Did you ever get the results, or they just keep?
Yeah, well, I mean, I got my personal results, and this was 2009. I don't remember exactly what mine did with or without the bolus, but I mean, obviously, its growth hormone is secreted through that fasting period. So, on the fasting day, you saw these big pulses. And he actually asked me if I was using steroids because my growth hormone pulses were so high. But I was adapted to intermittent fasting. But I was also supplementing with a product at that time called alpha GPC, which had been shown to boost growth hormone levels. So,
do you know the mechanism behind that?
I don't. And it's been so long. Yeah, I don't know, but I'll look that up. The product I was taking is no longer available. It was made by Biotest. This was back in 2009. I used to read everything on T Nation, and I wrote for them.
The same phase. I went through the same phase.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it was that. If you ever saw that small bottle, it had a yellow cap on the top, and it was Alpha GPC.
Right.
So
I actually take that, pretty regularly because I did a genetic testing and found that I'm pretty deficient in endogenous choline production and uptake of choline as well. And so I feel pretty awesome whenever I take larger amounts of Alpha GPC.
I'm sure.
Obviously with working as much as I do too, I need it for my brain function. Otherwise I feel pretty foggy at the end of the day, but with it, I feel pretty incredible.
Nice. But yeah, they actually, what they ended up compiling from that very first study was the large, and it, even to this day, it's the largest study of male hormones. But they basically, they found that growth hormone and testosterone are more impacted by health and body fat, body mass index than age. So like they would have an 80-year-old. They had, I think the oldest guy in the study that was healthy was like this 75-year-old cyclist who had like 10% body fat and exercised every day. He had higher levels of testosterone and growth hormone than an obese 18-year-old. So despite what, most people think like about aging, those numbers don't go down if you maintain diet and exercise the way that, people like you and I talk about.
Right.
Yeah. So that was really fascinating. And yeah, like you said, love at first sight.
Just imagine an acknowledgement you just hitting it off.
Yep. So, no, what she really did was she tricked me and she was like, I need to see the blood work on this before we're, pursue a relationship.
Smart one. I like it.
Yeah. All right, Anthony, we're going to get you to answer the final question. Every guest has to answer this one. We want to know your top 3 tips to live optimal.
Can I do 4?
You can do 4.
Okay. So I'll modify a little bit. Nutrition, eat real food, eat stuff that spoils 100% first for me. Second, I kind of shift these in priority, and now I'm starting to realize that stress management is so huge. I was looking at, so I've been traveling a lot recently. Countries like Spain, France, Italy. People, I was like, okay, people eat terribly. They have awful lifestyles. They, what is going on? What is the life expectancy here? Like I remember in Spain, it was like, I couldn't sleep. It was like 3 a.m. I was jet lagged and people were just like raging. It was like Tuesday, raging. And then they like eating fried food and drinking every single night and smoking. I'm like, the people have to live till they're only like 60 here. What's going on? Look at life expectancy. And it was like top 10. And same with all these countries. I'm like, like what could this be? And stress levels and like quality of life and perceived quality of life is so high there compared to the place like the US. The stress management to me has been very, very high. And so I would say to fix that, meditation, huge, is something that plus something like journaling, just writing down what's in your head. So that'd be tip number 2. Tip number 3 would be move often in different ways. So just like standing desk is not the answer. Okay. So hate to break it to you, but if you go from sitting all day to standing all day, you're not going to fix any problems. You're going to go from having a flexion bias low back problem to having an extension bias low back problem. Like it doesn't fix anything. So just move often. Then tip 4 would be just sleep like a normal human being. So don't have any distractions, get a routine, wind down, and just knock yourself out for as long as you need.
All right. I like it. Yeah. All right. So everybody listening, make sure you go to naturalstacks.com. You'll be able to see the show notes. We'll have links to Perfect Keto, Equipped Foods, some of the studies that we've talked about. And make sure you go to iTunes, leave us a 5-star review, share the OPP with the people in your life who will benefit from and enjoy the things that we're talking about here today. Anthony, thanks for joining us.
Appreciate it, Ryan.